HOA called cops to my lake cabin 5 times. I took them to court and walked away rich. Do you know what it feels like to have the police show up at your door again and again when you've done absolutely nothing wrong? I do. 5 times. They came with flashlights and frowns, asking the same tired questions. Is there a party? Are you storing illegal boats? Did someone report fireworks? I wish I was joking. Each time, I gave the same answer. No, this is my home. I'm just living. But someone didn't want me to. Her name is Claire Whitmore, chair of the Evergreen Waters HOA, 55 years old, power-walking addict, and the kind of woman who thinks she owns every tree and shadow in the entire lakefront. To her, I wasn't just a problem, I was a threat to her illusion of control. And all because I painted my deck red. It started the week I moved in. I had bought the cabin after years of Savangan escape from my tech job, from the chaos of the city. It needed work, sure, but it was mine. I spent every weekend sanding, hammering, rebuilding with care. I even built a small dock with reclaimed wood, added solar lights, hung a hammock. Then came the first letter. From the HOA. Your deck color violates aesthetic guidelines outlined on page 19, section 3B. I checked the bylaws. The page didn't exist, so I ignored it. That's when the calls started. Claire had reported me to the county for illegal tree removal. False. Then unlicensed dock construction. Also false. She even called the fire marshal claiming I had open flame violations because I used a grill. And every time, she made sure to watch from her balcony, wine glass in hand, like she was conducting a symphony of petty. But I didn't fight back, not at first. Because I believed in de-escalation, in talking things out. I even approached her one day kindly and said, "Hey, I get it, new neighbor changes, but I'm not trying to cause trouble." She looked at me like I was dog poop on her marble floor. "You people come here and think nature is your playground," she snapped. "This community has standards. If you don't like them, leave. You people." That stuck. I'm half Filipino. My last name doesn't scream old money lakefront. And suddenly, I realized it wasn't just the deck color. It was me. So I documented everything. The calls, the citations, the HOA letters. Even recorded a conversation where Claire told a neighbor, "I'll bury him in fines until he sells." It got worse when I installed motion lights. That night, the cops came again. "Noise complaint," one officer said. "Neighbor claims you're running some kind of business out here." I looked at him, then at my dog, sleeping by the fire pit. "This is ridiculous," I muttered. "This is harassment." And that's when the idea hit me, not just to fight back, but to win. I called a friend, Elena Reyes, civil rights attorney, pit bull in court, and best friend since college. "Elena," I said, "what would it take to sue an HOA for targeted harassment, false reporting, and emotional distress?" She laughed, then paused. "You got proof. I've got more than proof. I've got motive, bias, and 5 incident reports to match." She flew out 2 days later. What we uncovered would shock even the most hardened HOA survivor. Elena tore through the documents like a forensic surgeon. Within hours, she had highlighted a pattern so glaring it felt surgical. Claire had filed over a dozen anonymous complaints in the past year, but only against one homeowner, me. She had falsified claims under other board members' names. Worse, she'd even accessed HOA funds to investigate me, including payments to a so-called compliance officer who didn't exist. "This is classic targeted harassment masked as regulation," Elena said, tapping her pen against my deck. "She's using the HOA like a weapon. We can bury her." But that wasn't enough. I didn't want revenge. I wanted change. So Elena filed a dual suit. One against Claire personally for defamation, harassment, and misuse of authority. Another against the HOA board for negligence, lack of oversight, and violations of fair housing laws. But here's the twist. When we subpoenaed HOA records, we discovered something bigger. Claire had quietly amended the bylaws 6 months earlier without a community vote to give herself sole disciplinary authority over emergency matters of aesthetics and safety. It was buried in a document she'd titled Storm Resilience Budget Measures. Not one other board member knew. She had forged 3 digital signatures. "She's going down," Elena whispered as she compiled the evidence. "And she's not going down alone." The court date came fast. It was a sunny morning in late spring. I wore a simple gray suit. Claire arrived in pearls and a smug smile, as if she were walking into a PDA meeting instead of a lawsuit that could financially ruin her. She brought a lawyer from a boutique firm in town, one of those country club types with white hair and loafers. But the second Elena walked in with a rolling briefcase full of receipts, the room shifted. We started with the pattern of complaints, each one filed by Claire under her name, or anonymously but from her IP address. Then the forged bylaw amendment. Then the HOA slush fund she used to buy a drone inspection kit, which turned out to be a $2,400 DJI drone she used to spy on neighbors from her balcony. Claire scoffed when the drone footage was shown. "That's for neighborhood safety," she said. "There are fire hazards everywhere." His property was a mess. The judge raised an eyebrow. "The fire marshal's report says otherwise. No violations." Claire's lawyer tried to pivot, saying she was simply protecting the values of the community. Elena stood slowly and delivered the blow. "We've obtained messages, Your Honor, from the defendant to other HOA members calling the plaintiff a pest, a squatter, and saying she'll force him out if it takes all summer. That's not protection. That's prejudice." Then she handed the judge a final piece of paper. It was a settlement offer Claire had sent to the HOA board privately, offering to personally pay them if they would pass a rule banning short-term renters and first-generation homeowners. The courtroom went quiet. I could feel Claire's composure begin to slip. Her fingers clutched the table. Her mouth twitched. "That's out of context," she said, almost too loud. "Is it?" Elena asked. "Because we have emails, voicemails, even a recording of a board member confronting you about this plan." And just like that, the entire case turned from a personal dispute into a civil rights violation. But the most unexpected moment came when one of Claire's former allies took the stand. Her name was Meredith, an older woman on the HOA board who had once voted for the motion to cite me over my non-standard deck color. She looked visibly shaken as she sat down. "At first, I trusted Claire," she said softly. "She was persuasive, said we had to protect property values. But then she started targeting only certain people. She told me once, if we don't make an example out of him, this place will look like a trailer park." Gasps echoed from the back of the courtroom. "I wanted to say something," Meredith continued, "but I was scared. And I'm sorry. I was wrong." Claire's face was bloodless. The verdict came 2 weeks later. Claire was found personally liable for harassment, abuse of authority, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The jury awarded me $385,000 in damages, including $50,000 in punitive fines that had to come directly from her. But the bigger win: the HOA was ordered to dissolve and reorganize under independent state oversight. A compliance monitor was assigned. All prior citations Claire had filed, including against me, were nullified. Every homeowner got a mailed apology and a waiver on annual dues for the next year. Claire? She was removed from the board permanently, barred from serving on any HOA in the state. And she lost her job at the real estate agency where she'd been a top-selling luxury consultant. Turns out, nobody wants to work with someone who gets publicly shamed for violating civil rights laws. The day after the verdict, I went back to my cabin. I brewed coffee, sat on my rebuilt redwood deck, and watched the lake shimmer with sunlight. Peace had returned. But more than that, I knew I'd stood up, not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been told, "You don't belong here." Because I do belong here. We all do. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever seen someone abuse power behind a neighborhood or workplace title? Do you think HOAs still serve a purpose, or are they just playgrounds for control freaks? The story didn't end in the courtroom. It spilled out into the streets, into inboxes, into the hearts of every neighbor who had ever whispered, "She's gone too far." After the verdict was announced, Word spread like wildfire through evergreen waters. At the local coffee shop, whispers turned into bold conversations. On the community Facebook group which Claire once moderated with an iron fist, there were now posts calling her out by name. Screenshots of her emails went viral, even beyond the neighborhood. News outlets picked up the story. HOA chairwoman found guilty of harassment, homeowner awarded $385,000. For the first time, people who had been afraid to speak up finally did. I got letters in my mailbox reel, handwritten ones from neighbors I barely knew. Some apologized for staying silent. Others thanked me for standing up. One note simply read, "You didn't just win for yourself. You won for all of us." The ripple effect hit Claire hard. She tried to spin the narrative, telling anyone who'd listen that she was targeted by a smear campaign, that I manipulated the system, that the judge was biased. But no one bought it. Her allies vanished one by one. Realtors who once co-hosted wine tastings with her now unfriended her online. Her Pilates group quietly removed her from the email list. Even her dog groomer stopped taking her appointments. But the final blow came from within her own walls. Her husband filed for divorce. Apparently, she had siphoned thousands from their joint savings to fund her legal fees. He cited financial dishonesty and reputational damage as grounds for separation. Claire's empire didn't just collapse, it imploded. She was forced to sell her home to cover the lawsuit. The woman who once told me, "Your little shack devalues this community," now lived 2 towns over in a rented duplex near the interstate. A far cry from lakefront luxury. But still I didn't feel joy. Not really. I sat on my deck, staring at the same sunset I had when all this started, and felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Not for Claire, but for the fact that things had to go this far. That civility was drowned by control. That somewhere along the line she chose power over decency. And that choice had cost her everything. But from the ashes, something beautiful began to grow. A group of ustos who had felt oppressed, unheard, unseen formed a new organization, Neighbors for Fair Communities. We didn't want to eliminate HOA structures completely. We just wanted accountability, fairness, and humanity built into the systems. We held monthly townhouse open forums. No secret votes, no hierarchy. People laughed again, disagreed respectfully. Kids played by the water without being told they were too loud. Someone even suggested turning the old HOA office into a shared library. Jorge, my next-door neighbor who once supported Claire's enforcement policies, approached me one evening with 2 cold beers. "I owe you," he said. "Back then I thought order meant safety. But now I realize what we needed wasn't rules. It was trust." We clinked bottles and watched the stars come out. That night I finally exhaled. But there was one final twist. Something I never saw coming. About a month after Claire disappeared from the community, Elena and I received a letter. No return address, but postmarked from Claire's new town. Inside was a typed note. Short, precise, detached. "I still don't believe I deserved what happened, but I know I went too far. Maybe I wanted to protect something that never belonged to me. Or maybe I just didn't want to feel powerless. I hope you enjoy the peace I never let myself have. Claire W." I read it twice, then handed it to Elena. She didn't say much, just looked at the lake and whispered, "Maybe that's her version of closure." Maybe it was. In the months that followed, my life changed more than I could have expected. The lawsuit settlement gave me options. I didn't have to rush back to my tech job. Instead, I began writing about the experience, blog posts, articles, even gave a few speeches on local governance and civil courage. And the messages poured in. From every corner of the country. A mother in Georgia wrote, "My HOA threatened to evict me for installing a wheelchair ramp for my son. Thank you for showing me I'm not alone." A young man in Utah said, "They called the cops on me for unregistered noise because I played the violin outside. Now I'm building a case. Your story gave me the push I needed." It was more than just a lawsuit. It was a movement. Because the truth is, HOAs weren't the enemy. Power without empathy was. And once people started recognizing that, something fundamental began to shift. 1 year after the final court ruling, I hosted a celebration at the cabin. Not just for myself but for every person who had stood beside me, helped me, or finally felt free. We grilled by the lake. Kids jumped off the dock. There were no citations, no rules posted on tree trunks. Just people laughing, connecting, living. As the sun dipped low, Elena stood and raised a glass. "To community," she said. "The real kind." Everyone cheered. And I looked around, heart full, knowing we had done more than win a court case. We had reclaimed our right to belong. But I want to know what you think. Do HOAs help or hurt communities more in the long run? Where's the line between structure and control, and who gets to draw it? Have you ever faced injustice that wore a civil face? Tell your story. You're not alone. Winter rolled in like a slow exhale. The lake froze in gentle ripples. Pine trees dusted in white. Everything looked still from the outside, but inside, within the people who had lived through Claire's reign, there was quiet revolution. And within me, peace, but not the kind that whispers, the kind that knows. I had learned that standing your ground doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it's documenting. Sometimes it's listening to your gut. And sometimes it's trusting the law to work even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. But more than anything, I had learned this. You don't need to raise your voice when the truth is loud enough. In February, I got invited to speak at a homeowner advocacy summit in Chicago. I wasn't sure if I belonged. I was just a guy who painted his deck red and got lucky with a great lawyer. But the moment I walked into that conference hall and saw hundreds of people, young, old, diverse, weary, I knew this was bigger than me. Elena introduced me before my speech. She said, "He didn't come looking for a fight, but when it found him, he didn't run. He built something stronger." My voice cracked once during the speech when I talked about watching the cops come that fourth time, seeing my reflection in their cruisers, and thinking maybe if I just moved away, all this would stop. But I didn't run. And neither should anyone else who's ever been cornered by those hiding behind policy. I returned home to something unexpected. An envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a deed. It was for the small lot behind my cabin, the land I used to walk through on morning hikes. A neighbor who had moved away months ago, apparently moved by the outcome of my case, had transferred it to me. The note read, "Some things shouldn't be fought over. They should be shared. Keep the trees standing." And that's when it hit me. This place, this cabin, this deck, this lake height was more than refuge. It was responsibility. So I built a little bench there, just off the trail, facing the water. No plaque, no stone, just a spot to sit and think and remember that justice, when done right, doesn't just punish. It restores. In the weeks that followed, something surprising happened. A new HOA began forming, not like the old one. This was grassroots, voluntary, transparent. I was asked if I wanted to be part of the advisory committee. I declined, not because I didn't care, but because the best leaders are sometimes the ones who step back and make space for others to rise. Instead, I recommended Jorge and Meredith, and a younger couple who had just moved in, with a baby and a dog who barked too much. I trusted them to care about the right things. Not color schemes or lawn height, but kindness, honesty, safety without surveillance. And so far, they're doing great. But the final chapter of Claire's story would come, quietly, a year later. I saw her once more, not in court, not at a protest, but at the hardware store. She looked smaller physically and spiritually. No more pearls, just a gray sweater and jeans. We made eye contact, and for a moment it was like the wind stopped. She didn't say anything, neither did I, but something passed between us. Maybe not forgiveness, but recognition, that we had both been changed by fire, one literally, one figuratively. She walked away without saying a word. And honestly, that was enough. Today, as I write this, it's exactly 2 years since the first police car pulled into my driveway. 2 years since I questioned if I should fight or fold. I'm still here. So is the cabin. So is the red deck. The dock now has solar lights that glow like small stars over the water. Kids run along the shore. Strangers stop to say hello. And no one asks if I belong here, because now they know. And I hope you know this too. If someone ever tries to silence you, push you out, bury you beneath paperwork or fear, you are not alone. You have a voice. You have rights. And sometimes all it takes to turn the tide is to stand. Even when you shake. Especially then. But I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced harassment disguised as rules? Do systems like HOAs help protect communities, or can they do more harm than good when left unchecked? Have you ever stood up to injustice in your own neighborhood, school, or workplace? What gave you the strength to speak up? Share your story, because somewhere out there someone is watching, and maybe your courage will be the spark that gives them theirs.